This is an interview with Marston Gregory. He's a longtime Subud member, helper, um, various committee positions, and currently you're in the World Subud Council, or
I'm the Mohammed Subud Foundation. I've been a trustee for 8 years.
okay, very good. So Marston, what I usually do is start out by asking how you found and came into Subud. If you could just tell us that story.
Okay. Yeah. In 1970s, I moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and formed a theater company called the Mime Experiment Theater. And we were doing experimental things with mime. And I found a book by a Subud member. At the time, I didn't realize I had never heard of Subud. And it was Richmond Shepard. And he had a book out, which was a very profound book on mime, which was called Mime, the Technique of Silence. And in that book, in the biography, he spoke a lot about Subud and how he had found Subud. I didn't even hardly focus on that part. I focused on how important the book was to our theater company. And I called up his agent, found out where he was in LA, and he came over to give a workshop to our theater company, the Mime Experiment Theater in Albuquerque. And after the first session with him, he said very, in an interesting way, he said, "I need a ladihan," he said. And we all said, "Well, what's that?" I think some thought maybe it was a drug of some kind. We weren't sure. And he then spent the next few days after every session, people would ask more questions and he would talk more and more. He was always very open about talking about Subud. Even in 1970, this is June of 1973, approximately. I was opened in June, so it would have been a bit before that. And he also did a performance with the company. And afterwards, a number of members, Patricia Kerr and a number of other members, John Kerr, joined Subud. At that time, they were meeting at a little Subud hall. Actually, it was a friend's house, a Quaker friend's house in Albuquerque. And I went there and sat outside. In those days, many of us sat outside and listened to the ladihan. And then I was opened in June. It was interesting, though. I had to wait because the helpers were not ready. So I waited a number of months, way beyond 90 days, and had a very profound experience in my opening, which just was so deep and profound. I'd never experienced anything like it. And 49 years later, here I am, still active as a member. I became even more active because a year later, my to-be wife, Khadija Gregory, came to Albuquerque and came to a performance. And we did a lot of our performances in the park. They were Commedia dell'arte performances in the summer. We did mime other times of the year, and Commedia dell'arte, which is an Italian art form using Moliere plays. And she came, I was introduced, and a week later we were engaged.
A week?
Wow. A week later, it took a week. Yeah. So anyway, Richmond Shepard was a key point, actually, for many folks who joined Subud in those days, because Richmond was so very open, so very erudite about explaining Subud. Also, the helpers who opened me are, one is quite well known now as an architect. Antoine Predock was there at the time, and his explanation of Subud was, I would call it, brilliant. And Simon Shima also was a helper there, and he also gave an amazing explanation of the ladihan, Kejawan. And So yeah, so that's this
Do you
my start.
remember? Do you
And of
remember?
all places, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Who would think?
Do you remember what Antoine's explanation was?
I what I do remember about both of them is it was extremely simple, and the key thing they said is it's experiential, and you have to experience it. Which I later heard Bapak talk about this. He said describing the Lottie hunt is like if somebody said describe what a pear tastes like. That it's almost impossible to describe until you actually experience it. And so that I'm just so glad I made the jump and had that experience. But I'm very grateful that my first Lottie hunts were so significant for me that I never wanted to turn back. Yeah.
Can you describe any of the Lottie hounds that you experienced?
Well, some were just after one thing I should just share that my background is a Christian. I came from a very devout Christian family who were very engaged in the Methodist Church. And Methodism, as I witnessed it in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I grew up, was extremely liberal and very interdenominational. So my experience, I went to youth camps. I almost became a minister, actually, at one point in my life. And actually rejected that because I felt that my background as an actor, I'd be more like an actor on the pulpit than a minister in some ways. But so I rejected that path, but yeah, so yeah.
So what was next after your experience of being opened in Albuquerque and finding your fiance? What happened after
Well,
that?
Adija and I were married actually in a Methodist church there, and had a wonderful ceremony. And we were both we waited actually 90 days to get married. So we didn't sit and run out and we had a waiting period of 90 days. And we in that 90 days, we discovered we were incredibly compatible. In fact, even when we did signs, like, to see if our signs lined up and all that, it was just, yeah, amazing. And so 2 years later, I had some guidance that I needed to be somewhere else. And I ended up in San Diego. And in San Diego, they had just tested in a new chair and vice chair for Subud, California. And I had a lot of administrative experience, mostly administrating theater companies. And so I was asked to be on the committee as treasurer of Subud, California, which is a pretty big leap. You've been open 2 years and suddenly you're treasurer of Subud, California. Yeah. And fortunately, I had some background in finance, and so that was helpful. But that was my start, and I've been in a role in Subud almost on the national level, regional level. I was a chairman of Subud South, where I lived for a while, and so it's been quite an adventure. I figured out today 49 years. Next year will be my 50th, big 50, and 48 years married, happily married to my lovely wife.
So you were in Sacramento, and then somehow you ended up in
San Diego. San Diego. We moved to San Diego.
San Diego.
And then we lived in Marin for a while, and I got a job, interestingly enough, at Chubb Pacific Indemnity Insurance as a bond underwriter, which I found through a woman in Subud who worked for them. And I was out of work, and she said, "Why don't you interview?" And I thought, I'll never get this job. Like, what do I know about bonds underwriting, right? And they hired me, and because I had a master's degree, maybe, I'm not sure. But anyway, so I learned a lot about finance, which has been very helpful to me over the years. I worked there a year, and then I got a call from Martin Arquette in LA, who said, "Come on down. and helped me run our new Hope Street Hall rental business. And so after guidance, I went down and joined that team, and I was there for 5 or 6 years working, building that hall into quite a large rental business. Actually, Marty Arquette and I, and then some others worked on it. But it was first early what we call now a centerprise. The word has been coined in the last few years, but it was, and it sustained the building, and the building sold and moved on to Wilshire Boulevard. But that was an amazing experience. We did a lot of renovations on that building, and ended up selling for probably 20 times what we paid for it. It was quite a while. And working with Marta Nixie Arquette was just a joy. She was amazing.
Yeah. So were you on the committee when Bapak came to LA a few times?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I was part of the hosting team for Bapak, several visits to Los Angeles, and that was an amazing experience. And actually had one experience, there were many times I was close to him, never alone with him, but there was one time he actually came out in a hallway by himself and walked up to me, because I was supposed to take him and the rest of the party down for him to speak. And so I'm standing with Bapak alone, and it was kind of an interesting thing of what to say. And I remember it was the top floor of the Miramar Hotel, and he looked out over LA, and I looked with him, and I got the feeling he owned it. He looked out across LA, and I could just feel like this was his city suddenly. And that's the way Bapak was. The world was his in a way. And then the party rushed out, realizing that they were late because he was ahead of them, and we all went down together. But yeah, I feel very grateful that I was able to spend time with hearing Bapak talks, testing with him, and being near him. It was a precious part of my Subud life. Thank you.
Do you remember any special kind of testing sessions or anything with Bapak? Or anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to describe. I don't know what talking about that so much, but yes, testing with Bapak was extraordinary. And what was often interesting is Bapak, when he would test with the men alone, which happened once in a while, he would do Ladian and ask a few questions. He would actually come out into us there, and he would walk up to people and stand in front of them. And it was like he was giving them extra energy for their Ladian. I know I opened my eyes. Normally in Ladian, we have our eyes closed, not always, but I opened my eyes, and there was Bapak standing in front of me, looking at me with this wonderful smile on his face. And I just, all I can say is I felt this extra charge. Yeah. And it was so loving of him that he would do that. I mean, he could have just sat on the dais watching, and he would do this. And he actually said that once he would feel that someone weren't receiving their Ladihan fully or deeply, and he would go and pray for them in front of them. And that was quite amazing. But yeah, the testing over the years, I mean, which is some of it's recorded, but was always extremely profound and deeply moving. And yeah, I went to every World Congress and worked on most of the Congress teams over the years, which also is a whole nother story in itself. That working on World Congresses, to me, maybe because of my theater background, and there is a event management part of theater. It's like event management. I worked on almost all the Congresses. The one I missed was Germany, but I've worked on almost all of them. And that is such a huge thing. And of course, Bapak was, when he was alive, that was a key point, finding places for him to talk or test with members.
So what kind of Congress experiences do you remember mostly?
Oh my gosh, that would be a whole tape unto itself.
Just the
Congress,
highlights.
World Congresses. Well, I'd say probably one of the a memorable one was the Spokane World Congress, which Rivka, several, and myself and a number of others put together. And the interesting story is we sent out hundreds of letters to cities all over the U.S. to find a site for the World Congress, and we had Haroon Murray was in charge, and he was very, very exacting. He had a list of criteria, and they had to meet this criteria. And you would take every proposal that came in from a city, and you would run this list, and you would come up with a number. Like, so obviously the highest number was potentially the best site. And so we did all this. We had many, many, many cities. Some even made videos of it. Palm Springs made a huge video of the city and how wonderful it would be. And even though very hot, it was very warm. But they said that would be okay because they would have these little spray sprinklers everywhere. But the site that was chosen, Spokane, wasn't even, I mean, nothing came from them, And we were very close to making the choice. And the story goes that a woman, a Subud lady who lived in Spokane, was walking at the center there in their convention center in Spokane, and had heard that we were looking for a site, and had this really interesting kind of vision of seeing people. I have to get the story from her, but this is all my interpretation of it. But anyway, she had this vision. So she went to the main hall, the main office for the convention center, and asked them, gee, would they send a proposal? And said, what's the organization? Subud. And the woman said, wow, I think we sent them a proposal. And she looked in her drawer, and there was the proposal. It hadn't been mailed, probably never would. So if she hadn't gone in there, well, it arrived in the mail here in Seattle, where I live, at the Subud house here in Seattle. And I opened it up, and as I opened it up, I had this strange feeling like, I think this is the site. As I was reading through it, this is perfect. Everything is in place. And then I ran the number profile, and sure enough, it was the highest number of any of them. And it ended up, the testing was unanimous, and Spokane became the site for the World Congress. And it proved to be the largest World Congress ever, and the highest attendance. It generated, I think, in net profit, $250,000, because we budgeted for 2,000 people and ended up with 3,600 people. So the budget, the income was way over what we had projected. So we had this wonderful gift to give to the next committee. They had this wonderful gift of the proceeds from that Congress. So yeah, that's just one story. There are many, many, many stories. I mean, how the symphony concert happened at that Congress is another kind of amazing story, how that all came together. But yeah, so that's World Congresses. And I've been treasurer of one in Puebla, Mexico. I've done all kinds, and they're just, I love things that are international. Maybe that's why I've worked with the Mohammed Subud Foundation, which is international, with WSA. And I love the World Subud Association, which we're all a part of, that joins Subud. You think you're joining your local group, but the fact is you're joining a world association that is all over the globe and up to 88 countries. And I love that part, the internationality of it, the fact that people are from all religions, all walks of life, from wealthy to not so wealthy. Yeah.
So since you're in the world organization. What is your sense of how Subud is doing in the world right now?
Well, I think all organizations are struggling after we're calling post pandemic with the COVID thing, which is shut down. I think the inability to get together face to face, and this is on Zoom, which is a wonderful technology. But to me, the difference between the Ladihan with others and the Ladihan solo in your bedroom or wherever you're doing it is quite different. I have a very active Ladihan, and I need a lot of space, which I don't have at home. And that's one of the joys I find. In fact, Bapak said that the more space you have for Ladihan, the better. So he always recommended always get a hall bigger than you need, so that people can really move. But my Ladihan, and maybe it's because I was a dancer when I was 8 years old. I was a professional tap dancer. That was my first career. And I was billed as the child Fred Astaire in those days. So for me, moving and being a mime movement is just a part of my spiritual expression. So yeah. Answer to the question, I think everywhere is struggling. I do see lots of flowering things happening around the world. Groups that haven't had buildings are getting new buildings again. Groups are opening up again. The Columbia Monastery has done a huge renovation on much of the property. So there's still a lot of life left back out there. Yeah, lots of good things still going on.
Can you talk a bit about Sujila Dharma?
You mean Mohammed Subud Foundation or Susila Dharma? That's the one part of Subud I have not worked with. I've supported it with donations and my love and support, but never worked with Susila Dharma International, which is the charitable wing of Subud in the world. Because of my background in theater, the wing I worked or affiliate I worked most with was actually SICA, Subud International Cultural Association. And I was an executive director for them with Kateria Gardner back in the 90s, and actually flew to South Africa in her stead because she was ill. And that was an amazing experience to do Ladihan with African Subud members from all over Africa. It was an all Africa Congress in Johannesburg. And it was quite an astounding event. The testing was very profound. And it was, apartheid had just fallen maybe 6 months before. So there was a special feeling of freedom there. And to have African delegates come from different parts of Africa who had never been able to fly into Johannesburg suddenly were able to come. So that was a wonderful experience. But no, I haven't worked with Susila Dharma, though I have great admiration for the work that they have done. And I remember years ago when it was just a little subcommittee with lots of promises, and now they're doing charitable work globally. And it's wonderful to see 50 years later, all the progress they've made.
So were you in South Africa when Nelson Mandela was there?
He was there, but he was, I can't remember historically when he was released from prison, whether it was as apartheid had officially ended or not. I know there was one very wonderful kind of little moment that happened. We were at a university, and so we were eating in a university dorm. And so there were cooks behind a counter, and they would serve us each day. Well, as we lined up for this, we had people from all over Africa in African garb and all, blacks, whites, whatever, and all lined up. And because of apartheid, these cooks had never actually served anyone, but people that, because of apartheid, they had never served a Black African person. And I think that they were a bit stunned, about it. But I remember this wonderful moment where one of the servers came out from behind the counter and ran to one of our African brothers and hugged him and started crying and saying, "Please forgive me, please forgive us, please forgive us." And it was this very touching moment of the amazing kind of the guilt that so many had carried and the freedom that came from that. So I just hope the rest of the world has learned from forgiveness, and that was an amazing example of it. Also, it was Christmas time, so all Johannesburg was adorned not with the traditional European decorations, but all the streets are covered with lights they were glowing on and off and turning on and off. And they were African symbols for the first time ever. And it was quite an amazing drive. We drove through Johannesburg with the lights at Christmas, who all went off at 12 midnight. But that was an amazing, just part of my life in Subud has just been one amazing adventure after the other, and such a gift in so many ways.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So what are your predictions or hopes for Subud in the future?
Well, like everyone, I hope we're able to share this with the greater humanity. Bapak said it was for all of mankind. He gave a talk in LA, which they called it All of Mankind Talk. And he talked about how Subud really, it was brought, to this world because people ask, why now? Why do we need the Ladihan now? And I think it's because the Ladihan touches you deep in an inner place where it comes from, instead of from the head or the heart or mind. It comes, at least in my experience, from a deep inner place where if you open to that, it can be transformative and ultimately prepare you for the final act, which is leaving here, and being able to do that, and to be fully made one with the one Almighty God. And so my hope, of course, is that more young people who are in Subud step forward and take roles like I've done. And I do promise that though there's struggle in them, that there's great joy and amazing gifts that come from serving in these roles. So that would be my promise, my hope.
Mine too. So I don't really have any more questions. Do you have anything else that you would like to say or talk about?
Oh, golly. Yeah, I've often wondered about writing a book. And so far I started one, and but there are so many books out there. I don't know whether we need one more, but I do think we need, all of us who have experienced Subud need to be more open about sharing it with a greater public, and not be quite so wanting to hide. I think that the time is right for it. I think that as many of the more didactic forms of spirituality are being more difficult for people to handle, I think the freedom that's found in the Ladihan and is quite extraordinary and a true gift. So I would end with that. And my prayer to everyone who sees this, and may you be touched by it in some way, in the way Subud has touched me all my life. And thank you for this interview.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Let's see.